Thank you for the invitation here. I will speak about two things that have occupied me very much the last years. I have published a book recently about the citizen of the world, first published in Danish and then translated into English. And some years ago I published a book in Danish, German and French about the irreplaceable. And I will try to show the connection between these two ideas, the irreplaceable and the bioethics. I understand ethics as a care about the good life. And if we understand bioethics as a kind of ethics that focus on care about life confronted with today's advanced technology, and if we define cosmopolitanism in our time as a kind of care about the life of humanity confronted with the global burning issues of today, then bioethics can be understood as belonging to cosmopolitanism. In my book there I mentioned a citizen of the world. I have mentioned three burning issues of our time. First, the problem of financial globalization. The financial crisis in 2008 showed that we need a democratically controlled world economy. Second, the problem of intercultural coexistence. Conflicts and wars between different cultures shows that a reconciliation between cultures, for instance between Islamic and Judeo-Christian cultures, is strongly needed. And third, the problem of physical sustainability of the earth. This is the global problem in which bioethics must focus, since it has to care about living beings challenged by the consequences for humanity of using advanced technology. Human beings are not only increasingly exhausting some of our most accessible but non-renewable resources without being able to replace them with renewable resources, but they are also using production methods that might destroy the natural conditions for human life without enabling us to restore them. We might therefore leave future generations a world without with inferior material conditions to those we know. In particular, a world plagued by anthropogenic global warming. We need to exercise more responsibility toward the earth, so that people in the future world will not blame us for our exploitation of physical capital and the destruction of our world climate. But if bioethics today must be an aspect of cosmopolitanism to grapple with and offer solutions to the burning issues of our time, and if this cosmopolitanism, therefore, is a superior idea that encompasses all aspects of care about the world, on the other hand, bioethics is superior to cosmopolitanism in that bioethical reflection can most clearly express the fundamental normative principle of care about the whole world. Cosmopolitanism, very broadly defined, is a concern about global citizenship. The citizen of the world believes that national citizenship must imply living together with other kinds of national citizenship and must therefore recognize a global citizenship. The global problems that humanity faces today have made it necessary to accept a higher idea of sovereignty than the idea of the sovereignty of the nation state, not in order to abolish the sovereignty of any particular state, but in order to recognize a dual citizenship for every human being, that of the citizen of the state and the citizen of the world. This was the very abstract cosmopolitan idea of the Stoics 2,000 years ago, but it is now becoming politically concrete. Now the questions arise. What is the fundamental principle of cosmopolitanism? This question has recently been discussed by French philosophers. In the last two books of professor in philosophy at the Sorbonne, Yves Charles Sartre, There he proclaimed the idea of the non-appropriability of the earth as a founding principle of cosmopolitanism today. He argues that in our time, the appropriation of the earth is unacceptable, both from an ethical point of view and from a legal point of view, since the earth is the common dwelling of all human beings. I will not deny that the idea of non-appropriability of the earth must be an important normative idea of cosmopolitanism today. But it seems to me that cosmopolitanism cannot be limited to a denial of the right to unlimited appropriation and domination of the earth, which is coming to all human beings. So my question is, doesn't bioethical reflection dig deeper by looking for an even more fundamental principle that expresses care about life on earth, whether it is economic, cultural, or biological and existential life? In order to answer this question, we must first clarify why care of living being is a primary demand in our time. In earlier times, ethics was only about concern for the other human being. It was only about good personal relationships. But ethics has been enlarged to include bioethics because medical treatment and biotechnology make possible all kinds of biochemical and technical interventions in living organisms in general and in human beings in particular. Thus, the enlarged concept of bioethics extends from ethics of the relationship between patient and health professional to the ethics of care for animals and for the whole of nature. Bioethics concerns our entire life world, insofar as its ethical judgments are relevant to biomedicine, our treatment of animals, and our conduct in relationship to the ecosphere as such. It is intimately connected to an understanding of the good life with the other, both the other person and the nature in which we live and for which we are responsible. Just as I must show my respect for another person for his or her own sake, I must show also my respect for nature for its own sake, recognizing it as just as irreplaceable as the persons who constitute the condition and an enrichment of my life. This indicates the fundamental principle of bioethics, in my view. It is the irreplaceable of the human being and of living nature. This irreplaceability constitutes an appeal to our care and our responsibility. The German philosopher Hans Jonas, you certainly know, claims in his book, The Imperative of Responsibility, that modern, I quote, modern technology has introduced actions of such novel scale, objects, and consequences that the framework of former ethics can no longer contain them. The prescription of neighbor ethics still holds in their intimate immediacy, but this sphere is overshadowed by a growing realm of collective action where doer, deed, and effect are no longer the same as they were in the proximate sphere, and which, by the enormity of its power, forces upon ethics a new dimension of responsibility never dreamed of before. End of quotation. This new ethics implies, according to Jonas, three new elements of responsibility, as I meant here. The first, in that nature has become so vulnerable to human intervention that we are no longer sure that it will subsist independently of the way we treat it. And second, knowledge about the technological means of action has become the primary duty beyond anything claimed for it before, because today we must consider the global condition of human life and the far-off future, even existence of the race. And third, the anthropocentric confinement of former ethics no longer holds. When Jonas has connected whereas Jonas has connected the concept of responsibility, what the Japanese philosopher Tomonobu Imamishi has called, from an eco-ethical perspective, I quote, the technological conjuncture of our world today. Then on the other side, the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas has improved our understanding of responsibility by taking into account the barbarity of the Holocaust in the 20th century. Levinas speaks about the face of the other that calls my freedom to responsibility and founds it. And we now unify the two if we now unify the two concepts of responsibility, that of Jonas and Imamishi on the one hand, and that of Levinas and on the other hand, we cannot limit the concept of the other to the person we encounter face to face, but we must extend it to include not only individuals in the future, but also nature, the earth of the world, that is the condition of life and existence. When the French professor Sarka claims that the appropriation of the earth is unacceptable, he referred to the destructive consequences that the idea of global land appropriation has from the moment it is linked to the widespread idea of human beings, as Descartes said in his discourse on method, masters and possessors of nature. Therefore, it is important for him to presuppose the idea of the non-appropriability of the earth, and to understand by earth not only the vulnerable nature of which Jonas has spoken, but also the multicultural humanity that is the concern in, for instance, the recent works of Martin Nussbaum and the French Mireille Delmas-Marty. However, it must be recognized that the principle of the non-appropriability of the earth must be rooted in an experience and a conviction that our earth, like the other in personal relationships, is irreplaceable. Just as the other must be protected in the personal encounter, because if I lose him or her, this person is irreplaceable for me, it is also necessary to take care of our world, of our cosmos, to consider the cosmos as the other, because it can perish and become irretrievably unlivable, perhaps not in our lifetime, but for future generations. Truly, from a general human point of view, an individual animal can often be replaced, but from the same point of view, every species is irreplaceable, since it belongs to the richness of life, and the whole living globe is more irreplaceable than every other being, since it is absolute condition of human life on earth. The idea of the irreplaceable has deep roots in our culture. First of all, it presupposes that a human being needs a community. In Aristotle, the good life has to do with the right relations to other human beings, with our actions over them, with our reactions to their actions, with our cooperation with them. It has to do with care of others. Therefore, to Aristotle, ethics is not only a question of the good life in friendship, but also of the good life in social organizations, in governments, in politics. In Judaism, too, before the emergence of Christianity, ethics was a question of the formation of society. The Ten Commandments were original rules for social life. But with Christianity, a radicalization of ethics occurred when Jesus introduced the idea of the absolute value of the human individual. This makes ethics something more radical than social norms, which order the external relationship between people. It is this radical thought that is expressed by the idea of the individual human beings irreplaceable. Philosophically, detached from traditional theological language, This idea was first seriously propounded in 1785 by Immanuel Kant in his book On Groundwork on the Metaphysics of Morals, which claimed that the main idea in practical philosophy was that a human being must act in such a way that in any time he respects the human person as an end in himself and never merely as a means. It is true that we all treat each other as means to our ends, as we derive benefits from each other in order to achieve what we want. But if we treat others purely and simply as means to our ends, they have been reduced to nothing but material for our actions. Then we are not regarding them as end in themselves. In that case, according to Kant, they have no dignity. And what has dignity, he says, has no equivalent. It is irreplaceable. Thus, in Kant, the idea of irreplaceability becomes fundamental principle of his ethics. It is tantamount to the idea that every human being is unique. And in accordance with Kant, this will not be the case if such uniqueness is understood biologically, in the sense that each has his or her own DNA formula, because your uniqueness in question here is existential. Human twins having the same genetic code are not identical existentially. If one of them dies, the loss is irreparable. He or she cannot simply be replaced by another being with the same DNA code. Today, it is this idea of irreplaceable we can adopt as fundamental principle in every bioethical reflection on the protection of the human being and of the whole living world that constitutes our life world. Thus, bioethics offers to cosmopolitanism a more fundamental principle than the idea of the non-appropriability of the earth. It shows that fundamentally the citizen of the world, whether he or she is concerned with financial, cultural, or ethical coexistence, has to adopt the idea of irreplaceability, both of the human individual in society and of the nature that sustains that individual's existence. Thank you.